The rain poured down relentlessly, soaking the earth beneath the wheels of the old Jeep. Eli Morgan had never expected to survive that fateful day in the war. But here he was, alive, though not entirely whole. The years had been harsh, and the pain, both physical and emotional, had only deepened with time. But what Eli didn't know, what he had never expected, was that the one thing he had lost in the war, his loyal German shepherd, Ghost, was about to come back into his life in a way he could never have imagined. It had been years since he last saw Ghost, the dog who had been by his side through thick and thin, in battles, in moments of peace, and in the silent nights after the chaos of combat. But the dog was not gone, and the reunion was not going to happen the way Eli had imagined it. As Eli sat there, the cold biting at his skin and the storm raging outside, he couldn't help but wonder if this was the final test of his strength. What he didn't know was that this was the moment that would change everything. Ghost was out there, and he would find his way back to Eli, just like he always had. Ghost had been more than a dog. He had been a protector, a companion, and, above all, a symbol of the loyalty that Eli had once fought for. Little did Eli know that loyalty was about to bring him the kind of healing he had been desperate for. The Jeep's headlights cut through the storm as Eli's thoughts drifted to the past, but just as quickly, his mind snapped back to the present when a shadow appeared in the distance. It was Ghost. The dog was no longer the same. Time had passed, but the bond between them was unbroken. There, standing in the pouring rain, was the dog Eli had thought he'd lost forever. The realization hit him like a wave. It was Ghost. Eli's heart raced as he slowly opened the door of the Jeep, the sound of rain pounding against the metal. Ghost, soaked to the bone but still standing strong, walked toward him with the same unwavering loyalty that had defined their relationship in the past. The storm may have raged, but in that moment, Eli felt something he hadn't in years: hope. Ghost's eyes met Eli's, and without hesitation, the dog bounded toward him, tail wagging, and the reunion was nothing short of miraculous. In that brief moment, the years of pain and solitude seemed to vanish. Eli had thought he was beyond saving, but in that moment, everything changed. Ghost had returned, not just as a dog, but as a symbol of everything Eli had fought for: loyalty, love, and the unwavering bond that had never truly been broken. The storm raged outside, but inside the warmth of the Jeep, Eli couldn't believe what was happening. Ghost was here. After all these years of pain and loneliness, the dog he had thought lost forever had returned to him. Eli slowly reached his hand out, not sure if he was still dreaming or if this was real. Ghost's amber eyes, full of recognition and trust, locked onto his. The dog was tired, his fur matted and soaked from the relentless rain, but the loyalty in his gaze was unmistakable. Without thinking, Eli slid out of the Jeep and knelt on the wet ground. Ghost stepped forward cautiously, his tail wagging slowly as he closed the distance between them. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, but there was no need for speech. The bond they shared had always been deeper than that. Eli wrapped his arms around Ghost, pulling him close. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. It was just the two of them, reunited after the long years of separation. The rain seemed to soften, and the storm outside felt a little less fierce. Eli had always known that Ghost was more than a dog to him. The German shepherd had been his protector, his companion, and his constant source of strength during the darkest days of the war. But now, with the years of hardship behind them, Ghost was back, reminding Eli of the things that really mattered. As Eli stood, he felt the weight of the years that had passed, the years without his loyal friend by his side. But Ghost had never truly been gone. He had simply been waiting, just as Eli had, for the right moment. Eli took a deep breath, his chest tightening with emotion. He could feel the warmth of Ghost's body pressed against his side, the familiar scent of the dog that had been his constant companion. It was like no time had passed at all, but in reality, everything had changed. They had both been through so much, yet here they were, standing together once again. Eli looked down at Ghost, his heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and relief. This was more than just a reunion. It was a second chance, a chance for both of them to heal, to move forward, and to find peace after all the chaos that had consumed their lives. Ghost had returned, and with him, a sense of hope that Eli had long forgotten. The years of pain and loneliness had been long, but in that moment, it didn't seem to matter. What mattered was that they had found each other again. Eli gently scratched behind Ghost's ears, his hand trembling slightly. Ghost leaned into the touch, his tail wagging even faster now. It was as if the dog was telling him, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in years, Eli truly believed it. The bond they shared was unbreakable, and it had withstood the test of time. As they stood there in the rain, Eli realized that he wasn't alone anymore. Ghost was back, and together, they would face whatever came next. The days that followed were filled with a quiet kind of healing. Eli and Ghost spent their mornings together, walking through the thick forests surrounding Eli's home. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. For the first time in years, Eli felt a sense of peace settle over him. Ghost was no longer just a dog to him. He was a reminder that life could still hold moments of grace, even after all the darkness. Each step they took together was a step away from the pain Eli had carried for so long. The house, once silent and cold, now felt warmer. Ghost would follow Eli around, never straying far. It was as if the dog had never left, and the bond between them had only grown stronger with time. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Eli couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. He thought back to the days when he had believed the war had stolen everything from him. He had come home broken, both physically and mentally, unsure if he would ever find peace again. But in Ghost's eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen in a long time: unconditional love. It was that love that had kept Eli going, that had driven him to push through the darkest moments of his life. It was the same love that had brought Ghost back to him. For all the pain Eli had endured, he realized now that Ghost had never given up on him. The dog had waited, just as Eli had, for the right moment. And now, here they were, side by side, healing together. Ghost had become Eli's anchor, the one thing that reminded him of what was good in the world. Every day, they grew stronger, and every day, Eli felt a little more whole. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the weight of the past would press down on him. But with Ghost by his side, Eli knew he could face whatever came next. The dog's presence was a constant reminder that, even in the hardest times, there was still a chance for redemption, for healing, for a fresh start. One afternoon, as they walked down a familiar trail, Eli noticed how much lighter his steps had become. It was as if the burdens he had carried for so long were finally starting to lift. He looked down at Ghost, who trotted along beside him, his tail wagging. Ghost was happy. And for the first time in years, so was Eli. He didn't need to say it out loud, but in that moment, he knew that whatever had happened in the past, they had both found something new. They had found peace. Together, they had found their way back to each other, and that was all that mattered. Eli reached down and ruffled Ghost's ears, a small gesture that spoke volumes. In return, Ghost looked up at him, his amber eyes filled with trust and devotion. They had both been through the storm, but now, the skies were clear. And for the first time in a long time, Eli felt like he could breathe again. The days passed in a comfortable rhythm. Eli and Ghost found a peaceful routine. The mornings were spent walking through the woods, their feet crunching on the autumn leaves, and the afternoons were for quiet moments in the house. Sometimes, Eli would sit on the porch, watching the sunset as Ghost lay beside him, his head resting on Eli's feet. There was something about the quiet that felt healing, something about the steady presence of Ghost that made everything feel right again. Eli no longer felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. The pain from the war, the loneliness, the haunting memories, all of it seemed to fade in the presence of the dog who had never left his side. It was a feeling Eli had long forgotten: peace. He remembered when he first came home, how empty everything had felt, how he had longed for a companion, a friend. And now, years later, here was Ghost, his loyal companion, standing by him through every difficult moment. It wasn't just the quiet moments that made things better. It was the small, simple things. The wag of Ghost's tail when he returned from the barn. The way the dog would nuzzle his hand when Eli was lost in thought. It was in those small acts of loyalty that Eli realized how much he had taken for granted before the war. The world outside might have been uncertain, but here, with Ghost, Eli felt grounded. They were a team again. And in this moment, it didn't matter how much time had passed or how much they had been through. What mattered was that they had each other. One afternoon, Eli and Ghost took a walk down to the river. The cool breeze rustled the leaves above them, and the water flowed steadily over the rocks. Eli paused for a moment, taking in the peaceful scenery. He felt lighter, somehow, as if the burden he had carried for so long had been lifted just a little bit more. Ghost walked alongside him, occasionally stopping to sniff the air or explore a patch of grass. It was the kind of moment that Eli had missed for so long, the simple joy of being in the world without the weight of the past dragging him down. As they reached the edge of the river, Eli sat down on a large rock, his hands resting on his knees. Ghost stood beside him, his eyes scanning the surroundings. For a moment, they sat in silence, the only sound being the rushing of the water below. Eli thought about the years of struggle, the moments of doubt, and the loneliness that had once consumed him. But now, with Ghost by his side, he felt a sense of gratitude that he hadn't known in a long time. The future was still uncertain, but with Ghost at his side, Eli knew he could face it. No matter what came next, they would face it together. The river flowed on, unchanging, just as Eli's bond with Ghost remained steadfast. In that moment, he realized that home wasn't just a place. It was the feeling of being with someone who understood you, someone who never gave up on you, even when you had given up on yourself. And with that thought, Eli smiled, his heart full of gratitude for the dog who had never left him, the dog who had saved him in more ways than he could count. As the days grew longer and the autumn leaves began to fall, Eli and Ghost found themselves settling into a new rhythm, one of peace and quiet that they had both desperately needed. The mornings were crisp, with the scent of pine and damp earth lingering in the cool air. Eli found himself waking up early each day, feeling the familiar weight of Ghost lying at the foot of the bed, his steady breathing the first sign of life in the morning. It was a comfort that Eli hadn't known for years, a reminder that no matter how hard life had been, there was always something worth holding on to. The war had left its marks on Eli in ways he had never truly understood. It wasn't just the scars on his body. It was the darkness that had crept into his soul, the loneliness that had haunted him even in the midst of people. But with Ghost by his side, Eli felt a sense of purpose again, a reminder that life, though unpredictable, could still be meaningful. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Eli sat on the porch with Ghost by his side. They had spent the day exploring the woods, and now, as the world around them slowed, Eli couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. It was a simple life, one that he had never imagined he would find after the war. But it was his, and it was enough. Ghost was a part of that, a part of the healing that had come slowly but surely. The dog had not only brought him comfort, but had shown him the power of loyalty, of a bond that went beyond words. Eli had always thought he was too broken to heal, too lost to find his way back. But Ghost had taught him that healing didn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes, it came in the form of small, everyday moments. And as the sky darkened and the stars began to twinkle overhead, Eli realized that he had found something he thought he had lost forever, a sense of peace. They didn't need to speak. The silence between them was enough. Ghost's presence was a constant reminder that even in the darkest times, there was still love, still hope. Eli leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment, and he could feel the warmth of the dog beside him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was as if, in this simple moment, everything was as it should be. The world outside might still be uncertain, but here, with Ghost, Eli felt a sense of belonging that he had longed for. There was no rush, no pressure. It was just the two of them, together, finding solace in each other's company. As the night grew colder, Eli pulled his jacket tighter around him, but Ghost stayed close, never leaving his side. They were a team again, just as they had been all those years ago. Only now, they were different, stronger, more connected. And in that quiet, peaceful moment, Eli knew that no matter what the future held, as long as they had each other, they would be okay. As the seasons shifted and the chill of winter began to set in, Eli and Ghost found themselves facing new challenges, though they were no longer the same people they had been when they first reunited. The snow began to fall in delicate flakes, covering the ground in a soft, white blanket, and with it came a new rhythm to their days. The once quiet house now felt alive with purpose. Each morning, Eli would rise before the sun, feeling the weight of the past lift just a little more each day. Ghost, ever faithful, would be by his side, waiting for the day to begin, eager for their walks, their moments together. Eli had found a routine in these simple, everyday activities, and for the first time in a long while, the darkness of his past seemed far away. But with the passing of time, a new kind of peace settled in, one that was built not just on the bond he shared with Ghost, but on the understanding that healing was a slow process. It wasn't instantaneous, nor was it perfect, but it was real. There were still days when the weight of his memories would press down on him, when the scars of war would rear their head, but they were becoming fewer and farther between. On those days, Ghost was there, his presence steady and unyielding. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Eli watched the flames dance in the hearth, the soft crackling sound filling the room. Ghost lay at his feet, his head resting on the floor, eyes half closed in contentment. For a moment, Eli simply watched the dog, reflecting on how much had changed since that first day Ghost had returned. They had both been through so much, and yet here they were, together, finding their way forward. It wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always comfortable, but it was a journey they were taking together. The healing they had found in each other was nothing short of a miracle, and Eli couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had thought that the war had taken everything from him, that it had stolen his future, his sense of self, but in Ghost, he had found something he hadn't realized he was searching for, a second chance. As the night wore on, Eli stood and stretched, the firelight casting shadows across the room. He walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. The world seemed still, peaceful, untouched by the chaos that had once consumed it. He looked down at Ghost, who had followed him, sitting at his feet, ever watchful. Without a word, Eli opened the door, and they stepped outside together. The cold air bit at his skin, but he didn't mind. Ghost trotted alongside him, his paws leaving tracks in the fresh snow. They walked in silence, the only sound being the crunch of their footsteps in the snow and the occasional rustling of the wind in the trees. There was something about the quiet of the winter night that felt comforting to Eli, something about the stillness that allowed him to breathe a little easier. As they walked through the snow-covered woods, Eli realized that this, right here, was what he had been waiting for. It wasn't a grand revelation, nor a dramatic moment. It was simply the peace that came with knowing that, no matter what had happened in the past, he had a future now. A future with Ghost, a future that was his to shape. He wasn't alone anymore. They weren't alone anymore. And that, in itself, was enough. As winter deepened, Eli found himself adjusting not just to the colder air, but to the subtle shifts in his heart. The silence of the snowy landscape, the quiet moments shared with Ghost, had a way of making everything feel simpler. Life, for all its complexities, had a way of boiling down to the simplest of things. The warmth of companionship, the feeling of being understood without words, and the comfort of knowing that the worst days were behind him. Ghost, his ever-loyal German shepherd, had become not just a companion, but a symbol of Eli's resilience. He had found a way to survive, to rebuild, with Ghost by his side, just as the dog had been there for him through the toughest moments of his life. It was in the small moments that Eli found peace, the way Ghost would nudge his hand with his nose when Eli was lost in thought, or how the dog would rest his head on Eli's lap after a long day. These moments of connection, however fleeting, were Eli's quiet victories. He often found himself reflecting on how far he had come. There had been a time when the weight of his past seemed insurmountable, when the scars from the war felt like they would never heal. But now, with Ghost beside him, those memories didn't feel as heavy. They were still there, of course, but they were no longer the anchor that held him down. One evening, as the snow continued to fall softly outside, Eli sat by the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker. Ghost lay by his feet, his breathing steady and calm. The fire crackled, filling the room with warmth, and for the first time in a long time, Eli felt a deep sense of gratitude. He realized that the healing process, while slow, had been happening all along. It wasn't something that could be rushed or forced, but something that had to be allowed to unfold naturally. And with each passing day, he felt a little bit lighter, a little more at peace. Life wasn't perfect, but it was his, and for that, he was thankful. The quiet peace that had settled in his heart was something he never thought he would find again. It wasn't about grand gestures or big moments. It was about the small, everyday things. The sound of Ghost's paws on the floor as he walked into the room. The way the dog would follow Eli around, always by his side, ready to protect him if needed. It was a reminder that, no matter what had happened in the past, Eli had a future to look forward to. A future with Ghost. And that was enough. As the night stretched on and the fire slowly burned down, Eli stood and stretched, feeling the weight of the day lift from his shoulders. He walked to the window and looked out at the snowy landscape. The world outside was still, peaceful, untouched by the chaos of the past. He could hear the sound of Ghost's breathing behind him, steady and reassuring. In that moment, Eli knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, as long as they were together, they would face them. Together, they had found a new beginning. Together, they had found peace. As the months passed, Eli began to notice the subtle changes in himself. He had never been one to talk much about his past, especially the war. It was something he had locked away, a part of his life that he tried to forget. But with Ghost by his side, the weight of those memories seemed a little less suffocating. It wasn't that they were gone, but with Ghost, there was space for healing. The dog had become more than just a companion. He had become a mirror, reflecting back to Eli the man he had once been and the man he was becoming. It was in the quiet moments, the ones spent in the stillness of the forest or by the fire at night, that Eli found his strength again. He began to realize that healing didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a sudden revelation or a dramatic shift. It was the slow, steady process of putting one foot in front of the other, of learning to live again, day by day. Eli was no longer running from his past. He was learning to accept it, to live with it, and most importantly, to move forward. Ghost was there every step of the way, a constant presence in Eli's life. Whether they were taking long walks through the snow-covered woods or simply sitting together in silence, Eli never felt alone. The dog's loyalty was unwavering, and it gave Eli the courage to face the parts of himself he had buried deep inside. One afternoon, as the first signs of spring began to appear, Eli found himself standing in the middle of the clearing near his cabin, looking out over the land that stretched before him. The snow had started to melt, and the earth beneath his boots felt soft, alive. He had always loved this place, but now it felt different. It felt like home, like it had always been meant to be his. Ghost stood beside him, his head held high, as if he, too, understood the significance of the moment. Eli took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly at peace. There were no more shadows in his heart, no more lingering doubts. He had made it through the darkness, and now, with Ghost by his side, he was ready for whatever came next. As they stood there, watching the world around them come to life once more, Eli realized that this was the beginning of something new. It wasn't the end of his journey, but the start of a new chapter. With Ghost, he had found his way back to the light. Together, they had made it through the hardest parts, and now, the future seemed wide open. Eli smiled, looking down at Ghost, who was watching him with those familiar amber eyes. It was a smile that was full of hope, full of possibility. They had come so far, and there was still so much to discover, together. As the days grew warmer and the first signs of spring blossomed around Eli's cabin, he found himself reflecting on how far he had come. The journey that had once seemed so uncertain now felt like a well-worn path, one that he was finally walking with confidence. His mornings had become a routine he cherished, waking up early to the sound of birds chirping outside, the scent of fresh pine in the air, and the comforting presence of Ghost lying beside him. The dog had never left his side, and together they had weathered the toughest storms, both literal and metaphorical. Eli smiled as he looked at Ghost, who lay contentedly by the window, his eyes trained on the distant trees. There was a quiet understanding between them, a bond that had only deepened over time. They didn't need words to communicate. A glance, a small gesture, was enough. For the first time in years, Eli no longer felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. It wasn't that the past had disappeared, it never would, but he had learned to live with it, to accept it as part of his story. He had come to understand that healing was not about forgetting or erasing the pain, but about finding a way to move forward despite it. One afternoon, As they walked together through the woods, Eli found himself taking deeper breaths, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. The trees stood tall around him, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. Ghost trotted ahead, his tail wagging as he explored the familiar territory. Eli followed, taking his time, feeling the softness of the earth beneath his boots. It had been a long time since he had felt this level of peace. There were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, he felt ready to face them. As they reached a clearing, Eli paused and looked around. The forest stretched out before him, vast and untamed. But it was beautiful, and it was his. The realization hit him like a wave. He had once believed that his life had been defined by loss, by the things he had left behind. But now, standing in the middle of this quiet, thriving world, Eli understood that he was still here. He was still alive. And with Ghost by his side, he could face whatever came next. The dog came back to his side, nuzzling Eli's hand, as if reminding him that they were in this together. Eli smiled and bent down to scratch behind Ghost's ears. There was no need for grand gestures or complicated plans. What mattered was that they had each other. What mattered was that Eli had finally found a way to heal, not by forgetting the past, but by embracing the future with hope. As they made their way back to the cabin, Eli couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for everything that had brought him to this moment. He had found peace, not in the absence of struggle, but in the presence of a loyal companion who had never given up on him. And together, they were ready for whatever the next chapter of their journey would bring. The days continued to pass, each one bringing a little more warmth to the cabin as the spring season began to truly settle in. Eli had noticed something about himself that he had never really paid attention to before. The way his body had started to heal, the way his mind had begun to clear. It wasn't something that happened overnight, but with each passing day, he found himself looking forward to more than just surviving. He found himself looking forward to living. Ghost remained by his side, as ever loyal as the day they had reunited. The dog had become his constant companion, his rock. It wasn't just the walks through the woods or the time spent in the quiet of the cabin. It was the small, everyday moments. The way Ghost would nudge his hand in the morning, reminding Eli that he wasn't alone. The way the dog would look at him with those amber eyes, full of understanding, as if the two of them shared a secret no one else could comprehend. It was in those moments that Eli realized the truth. It wasn't just about healing the past. It was about building a future. One afternoon, as they sat outside on the porch, the sun shining down on the land, Eli found himself lost in thought. The world around him felt quiet and still, but in a way that brought comfort rather than a sense of isolation. The trees were starting to bud, and the grass was turning green again after the long winter. There was a soft breeze in the air, and for the first time in years, Eli allowed himself to truly appreciate the beauty of the world around him. The weight of the past wasn't gone, not entirely, but he was beginning to understand that it didn't have to define him. He had the power to choose how he moved forward, and he had the strength to embrace whatever came next. Ghost was there, just as he always had been, sitting quietly at his feet, content in the simple presence of his owner. Eli smiled down at the dog, grateful for everything that had brought him to this point. He had come so far, and it hadn't been easy. There were days when the darkness threatened to take over, when the memories of war and loss felt too heavy to bear. But there was also light. There was the light that came from the bond he shared with Ghost, from the healing that had slowly, quietly, started to take root in his heart. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about moving forward with it, about finding a way to live with it, and still find joy. That was something Eli hadn't believed was possible for a long time. But now, with Ghost by his side, he was learning how to live again. And as the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the land, Eli felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. He was no longer defined by his past. He was defined by the choices he made now. And the choice to keep moving forward, to keep healing, was the most important one he had ever made. With Ghost by his side, Eli knew he wasn't alone. Together, they would face whatever the future held, one step at a time. As the seasons continued to shift, Eli found himself embracing the changes in both the world around him and within himself. The cabin, once a place of solitude and sorrow, now felt like a true home. Ghost had been with him every step of the way, offering a quiet strength that no one else could understand. There was something about the way the dog looked at him, those amber eyes, full of loyalty and understanding, that made Eli feel like he wasn't just healing, but growing. It had been a long road, one full of twists and turns, but with each new day, Eli was learning to accept the past, not as a burden, but as a part of who he was. He wasn't defined by his experiences, but by how he chose to move forward. The walks through the woods had become a ritual, a way for Eli to connect with the world around him and, in turn, connect with himself. Ghost was always by his side, his presence a constant reminder that no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, he would never be alone. Eli had come to appreciate the simplicity of their days together. There was no rush, no pressure, just the quiet companionship of a dog who had always been there when Eli needed him most. It was in these moments, these small pockets of time, that Eli found his peace. The memories of war, the pain, and the loneliness still lingered, but they no longer had the power to control him. With Ghost, he had found a way to live alongside them, without letting them define who he was. One morning, Eli woke up to find the sun streaming through the windows, casting a warm glow across the cabin. Ghost was already awake, his tail thumping lightly against the floor as he sat by the door, waiting for their daily walk. Eli smiled as he stretched, the quiet comfort of the morning settling around him. He had come to love these moments, the simplicity of just being. They didn't need anything more than each other, and in that realization, Eli found a sense of freedom he had never known before. After their walk, Eli found himself sitting on the porch, watching the world around him come to life. The trees were full of new growth, the air smelled fresh, and the world felt full of possibilities. He felt a quiet sense of pride in how far he had come, and in the fact that he had made it through the hardest of times. It wasn't always easy, but with Ghost by his side, Eli had learned how to face whatever challenges life threw his way. As he sat there, soaking in the warmth of the day, Eli knew that this was just the beginning. There was so much more to explore, so much more to discover, and he was ready for it. With Ghost, the future no longer felt uncertain. Together, they had found their way back to the light, and Eli was ready to embrace whatever came next, one step at a time. The days flowed together in a steady rhythm. The warmth of spring gradually began to give way to the embrace of summer, and with it came a deeper sense of contentment for Eli. The work around the cabin had become more manageable, and the once overwhelming task of rebuilding his life no longer felt so daunting. He had grown used to the quiet, to the way the days unfolded at their own pace, and with each passing moment, he felt more at ease in his own skin. Ghost had always been there, ever present and unwavering, and now, more than ever, Eli saw the value in the simplicity of their life together. There was no rush, no need to push forward into a future that seemed uncertain. Everything they needed was here, in these moments. One particular morning, Eli found himself waking earlier than usual. The sun had yet to rise, but the soft light of dawn was already creeping through the window, casting long shadows on the floor. He stretched slowly, feeling the tension of the past several years begin to ease from his body. Ghost was by his side, as always, his head resting on the edge of the bed, eyes open, alert but calm. The dog's steady presence was a comfort, a silent reminder that Eli was not alone, not in any sense. He smiled, reaching out to scratch behind Ghost's ears. The dog responded with a soft huff, wagging his tail lightly in acknowledgement. They both knew what the morning would bring. The usual quiet, the walk through the woods, the shared moments of peace. But it was these moments that meant everything. After their walk, Eli stood on the porch, watching as the world around him came alive. The air was still cool, with a slight breeze rustling the leaves of the trees. Ghost stood beside him, his head lifted, ears alert to every sound. Eli looked down at the dog, who gazed up at him with those ever-knowing eyes. It had taken time for Eli to understand the depth of their connection, but now he saw it clearly. Ghost had been his anchor, his constant throughout the storms of life. And in return, Eli had become the protector, the one who ensured that Ghost would never be left alone again. They were a team, no longer two separate beings, but a single force that moved forward together. The quiet of the morning stretched on, and for the first time in a long time, Eli felt no urge to rush. There was no pressure to achieve something, to be somewhere else. Everything was as it should be. Ghost nuzzled his hand, and Eli gently stroked the dog's fur, feeling the connection between them deepen even further. Life had thrown its challenges at him, had tested him in ways he could never have imagined. But in this moment, Eli knew that he was stronger than he had ever been. And he owed it all to Ghost, to the unyielding loyalty and love that the dog had shown him from the very beginning. Together, they had come through the darkest times, and together, they would face whatever the future held. Eli didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but with Ghost by his side, he no longer feared it. They had made it this far, and that was enough. As summer settled in, Eli felt a sense of calm that he had never known before. The days were long and warm, and he found himself waking earlier each morning to the sound of birds singing outside. Ghost was always there beside him, his loyal companion, and together they had built a life that was simple, yet fulfilling. The quiet moments, the walks through the woods, the days spent working around the cabin, all of it had become a source of peace that Eli had longed for. The weight of his past still lingered, but it no longer held him captive. He had learned to live with it, to let it shape him without letting it define him. Ghost had played a big part in that healing, a constant reminder of the power of loyalty and love. Eli would often find himself thinking back to the day they had first been reunited, to the moment when he realized that the dog he had thought lost forever was once again by his side. It had been a long road, but it was the road that had led him to this place, this moment of peace. One evening, as the sun began to set, Eli and Ghost sat on the porch, watching the sky change colors. The world around them was still, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. Eli looked down at Ghost, who was sitting quietly by his side, his head resting on his paws. It was a simple moment, but it was everything. They didn't need to speak. The bond between them was stronger than words. Eli's heart swelled with gratitude as he looked out at the world around him. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer had a hold on him. He had found a way to move forward, to live a life that was meaningful, one step at a time. The world was full of unknowns, full of challenges, but with Ghost by his side, Eli knew he could face anything. They had made it through the hardest times together, and now, they were ready for whatever came next. There was a quiet strength in knowing that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Eli stood and stretched, feeling the muscles in his back loosen from the long day. He turned to Ghost, who looked up at him with those familiar amber eyes. The dog stood and trotted to his side, as if knowing what was to come. Eli smiled and reached down to scratch behind Ghost's ears, a gesture that had become second nature. They had both come so far, and now, standing together in the quiet of the evening, Eli realized that this was what it was all about. The journey wasn't just about surviving. It was about finding peace, finding meaning, and finding the strength to keep going. With Ghost by his side, Eli knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. And that was all he needed.